Buenos Aires, 1978. There is a building called ESMA. It stands 700 meters from one of the biggest soccer stadiums in the world. ESMA was a detention center, a torture facility, a place where people were taken and never seen again. At the same time, 700 meters away, Argentina was hosting the 1978 FIFA World Cup. The prisoners inside ESMA could hear the crowd. They could hear 70,000 people cheering. The man running FIFA at the time, João Havelange, praised the Argentine government. He called the tournament a great success. 30,000 people were disappeared during Argentina's military dictatorship, some of them while the World Cup was happening. Here is what I want you to understand. Argentina 1978 is not an aberration. It is not a dark footnote. It is not the exception. It is the template, and the template has been running successfully for nearly a century. FIFA does not accidentally end up in bed with authoritarian regimes. It chooses them, deliberately, systematically, for reasons that make complete commercial sense. Here is exactly how it works. FIFA is not a government. It is not a charity. It is not an international body with legal authority over nations. It is a private organization, registered in Switzerland. Technically a non-profit association. That last word is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Here is how the host agreement works. FIFA arrives in your country. It sets the rules. FIFA keeps all broadcasting rights, all marketing revenue, all commercial income generated by the tournament. The host country pays for the stadiums, the roads, the security, the hotels, the airports. The host country also guarantees FIFA immunity from all local laws, tax exemptions, customs exemptions, visa controls. And then there is this. Jerome Valcke, FIFA's Secretary General, said the quiet part out loud in 2013. Less democracy is sometimes better for organizing a World Cup. When you have a very strong head of state who can decide, as maybe Putin can do in 2018, that is easier for us as organizers. He said the quiet part out loud, and nobody at FIFA fired him. Let's go back to the beginning. 1930. Jules Rimet, the father of the World Cup, wants to launch a global soccer tournament. He walks the streets of Geneva with a South American diplomat. No open bidding, no committee vote. Informal conversation. Rimet awarded the first World Cup to Uruguay, largely because the diplomat asked nicely. This established a pattern. The World Cup host is not elected. It is selected by a small group of powerful men. The host agreement does something remarkable. It suspends the host country's sovereignty in certain areas. FIFA's rules override local law. FIFA's commercial partners are protected by treaty-like agreements. In exchange, the host regime gets two things: legitimacy and nationalism. Legitimacy. The idea that if the world's biggest tournament happens in your country, the world has accepted you. Nationalism. 70,000 people in a stadium chanting your country's name, in a country you have just locked down. This exchange has a name. It is called sportswashing. You take a regime with a reputation problem. You give it a global spectacle. The spectacle provides cover. FIFA provides the spectacle. The regime provides compliance. It is a business arrangement. And like any good business arrangement, both parties benefit. One party benefits more. To understand how deep this goes, you need to go back to 1934. Benito Mussolini hosted the 1934 World Cup, and he did not do it quietly. Mussolini commissioned a trophy specifically for his tournament, the Coppa del Duce, 6 times the height of the Jules Rimet trophy. His players were called soldiers of sport, told they would dishonor Italy if they lost. Italy won, twice, 1934 and 1938. Jules Rimet was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1956. He didn't win because the committee noted he had handed Mussolini a propaganda platform and called it soccer. That is how bad it has to get to lose a Nobel Peace Prize nomination because of soccer. In 1974, João Havelange became FIFA president. He transformed FIFA from a gentleman's club into a commercial empire. Havelange brought in Coca-Cola, Adidas, and television deals worth billions. And in 1978, with that commercial empire fully operational, FIFA took the World Cup to Argentina. Argentina was under military dictatorship. The junta had seized power in 1976. Thousands of people were already disappearing. The regime was already running torture facilities. FIFA knew. The evidence is overwhelming. And they went ahead anyway. In 2015, the FBI arrested FIFA officials at a hotel in Zurich. Wire fraud, racketeering, money laundering. 14 officials charged, dozens more implicated. After all of that, human rights groups concluded FIFA was arguably more poorly governed than before the scandal. So why does FIFA keep doing this? The answer is so simple it almost sounds like a joke. FIFA is a commercial organization. It uses soccer as its product, and like any business, it wants the easiest possible operating environment. Democracies create friction, opposition parties, free press, protest movements, courts with actual teeth. Autocrats deliver compliance. No protests, no awkward press conferences, no courts ruling against FIFA's tax exemptions. FIFA has 211 member associations. Every single one gets a vote. The Cayman Islands gets the same vote as Brazil. Liechtenstein gets the same vote as Germany. The autocratic regimes in FIFA's network maintain loyal voting blocs. They vote the way they are told to vote. In soccer politics, as in regular politics, a reliable vote is worth more than a principled one. Let's look at what this actually meant in practice. June 21st, 1978. Argentina needs to beat Peru by 4 goals to advance to the final. Before the match, Argentina's military leader, Jorge Videla, and U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger visited the Peruvian dressing room. What was said in that room is not on record. What happened on the pitch is. Argentina won 6-0, by exactly the margin they needed. Not more, not less. The arrangement went further. Argentina agreed to ship Peru 35,000 tons of grain. Approximately $50 million in Peruvian assets were unfrozen. Political prisoners were transferred out of Peru. There is one more detail about that tournament that I want you to remember. The Argentine junta tried to change the official match ball crest. It carried the Perón-era symbol, not the junta's. FIFA refused. The visual brand of the competition was protected. The prisoners in ESMA were not. And during the final, with the whole world watching, the generals painted the goalposts black, because they wanted them black. Forward to 2022. Qatar. Qatar is a nation of roughly 300,000 citizens. To build the infrastructure for a World Cup, it imported approximately 2 million migrant workers. These workers operated under a system called kafala. Under kafala, you cannot leave your job without your employer's permission. You cannot change jobs. You cannot travel without permission. Your employer controls your legal status. The Guardian newspaper investigated the death toll. Their estimate? More than 6,500 workers died building Qatar 2022 infrastructure. Qatar's official figure was 3. A FIFA subcommittee recommended a legacy fund to compensate workers and their families. FIFA rejected it. Instead, FIFA President Gianni Infantino gave a 57-minute speech at the opening of the World Cup. In this speech, he said, "Today I feel like a migrant worker." He said this at an event where actual workers had died in their thousands. He is the head of the organization that rejected their compensation fund. But Infantino told you he felt like a migrant worker, so presumably it evens out. If all of that sounds bad, it is about to get worse. In November 2024, FIFA awarded the 2034 World Cup to Saudi Arabia. The vote took 11 seconds. Saudi Arabia was the only bidder. Amnesty International called it a new low for FIFA. Saudi Arabia's human rights record includes the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Gianni Infantino called it a great day for soccer. And 2026, this summer, brings the World Cup to the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The U.S. government has designated the tournament a national special security event. This brings in the full federal security apparatus, including ICE, Amnesty International, the ACLU, and the Sport and Rights Alliance have all raised alarms about what this means for fans attending the tournament. Infantino, responding to the political environment, invented a new award, He gave Donald Trump the FIFA Peace Prize. Now, before you cancel FIFA forever, and I understand the temptation, let's steel man the other side. Qatar did reform its kafala system. In 2020, it became the first Gulf state to allow workers to change jobs without employer permission. It also introduced a minimum wage. That is real. And it almost certainly would not have happened without the World Cup. In 1978, the Madres de Plaza de Mayo gained international visibility because of the media presence at the tournament. Journalist Simon Cooper argued the 1978 tournament was bad for Argentine investment and tourism, and good for human rights. In Russia, 2018, Iranian women bought tickets and watched matches. At home, they were banned from stadiums. The Pussy Riot protest on the pitch during the Russia 2018 final made global headlines. But here is the counter. Qatar's kafala reforms were poorly enforced. Human Rights Watch documented widespread violations after 2020. In Argentina, the violence resumed the moment the press corps left. In Russia, the government used the FIFA Fan ID system to track and target political activists. Before we get to the twist, 3 things most people get wrong. Misconception 1. FIFA is politically neutral. After Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, FIFA banned Russia from international competition within 4 days. Meanwhile, Israel, amid an ongoing military operation in the West Bank, received a trifling fine. That is not neutrality. That is selective enforcement. The difference matters. Misconception 2. The World Cup brings economic benefits to the host country. FIFA extracts all revenue. The host builds the infrastructure and inherits the maintenance liabilities. Most economic studies find the World Cup delivers negligible and often negative net economic benefit to the host. Misconception 3. A democratic host means a better-run tournament. Brazil. 2014 was a democracy. Brazilian police fired tear gas on their own citizens, protesting the cost of the tournament. Democracy does not immunize a host from FIFA's pressures. It just means the friction is more visible. Here is the thing most people miss. Even the ones who follow this closely, most people assume FIFA is useful to authoritarian regimes primarily as a propaganda tool, something to distract citizens. That is part of it, but it is not the most important part. What FIFA sells, more than anything else, is legitimacy by association. Authoritarian regimes are not primarily afraid of their own citizens. They are afraid of being pariahs. FIFA's endorsement is not bilateral. It is not country-to-country approval. When FIFA says you are welcome, it speaks in the name of 211 member associations. Saudi Arabia did not pay to host the 2034 World Cup because it loves soccer. It bought a legitimacy certificate. This matters right now. The 2026 World Cup has started. It is the first World Cup to formally include human rights criteria in the host selection process. Amnesty International and the ACLU are already documenting incidents. The NSSE designation is already in effect. Ahead of 2034, Amnesty International's verdict is already in. The system has not changed. So, let's zoom out. FIFA is a private Swiss organization that has turned the World Cup into the single most powerful legitimacy-granting instrument in global sport. Authoritarian regimes understand this better than most soccer fans. They always have. From Jules Rimet walking the streets of Geneva to Gianni Infantino in a Zurich hotel, the template has not changed. The game has not changed. You have. You're welcome. Subscribe if you enjoyed this type of content. It means a lot.